Hello everybody. So we're going to be jumping into Physiology 2. Now, Physiology 2, let me do a quick overview with you. A lot of Physiology 2 is going to be dealing with our hormone systems. So overview of endocrinology, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid, adrenals, pancreas, calcium, all that kind of good stuff. Then we'll get into digestive type material, digestive tract, the motility, how things move through there, the secretion of everything, digestion, then of course the organ, a whole bunch of like body fluids, kidney type stuff, which we touched on in Phys 1, homeostasis, acid-base balance. That's going to be diving back into that bicarbonate system that we talked about in Phys 1. And then, of course, the reproduction systems as well. And then we'll get in a little bit of dietary exercise, some more exercise physiology and thermoregulation. Now, all of the material that I am going to be using is the material that I used through the course. Some of the slides, some of the material is going to look different than what the current professor is using. However, the learning objectives should be the same, so all of the big questions in the general material all should be identical. And we're going to go through and focus and talk about each of these different points. So kicking off, endocrinology. So specifically, this is the part of physiology that talks about the endocrine glands and the hormones. Okay. Endocrine glands. Let's get a whole list. Endocrine glands are going to be all of those first chunk that we looked at. Let me write them all down. We're going to look at the adrenal. I'm sure these are listed later on, but I'll write them now. Parathyroid, pituitary, the thyroid, pineal gland, testes, ovaries, the thymus. I think those are pretty much all. Oh, and pancreas. I think that's all of them. Might be one or two that we missed, but that's okay. Oh, hypothalamus. I think that's all of them. Okay. So, a lot of hormones. What we're going to see a lot of are the feedback loop mechanism. So we've seen these before, the feedback loop mechanisms. I'm going to introduce you feedback loop of, let's do the adrenal gland. We're going to see a lot of stuff like this. So where you have the certain hormones being released, going and acting in different areas, what they release, and then what they go back, and they'll go backwards and inhibit everything, okay? So that's a lot of what we're going to be doing. These feedback loops, I'll make sure that you have every single one of them that you need. This is a lot of what you're going to study, understanding how the loop performs, like what's released from where, what's created and stored and released from where, what effect does it have on the body, and what effect does it have when it does the feedback loop. So that's what we're really diving into. So for this lecture, this is the introduction to endocrinology. We summarize the major endocrine functions, compare and contrast the endocrine versus the nervous system, and also the endocrine versus the exocrine glands. So we look at this. We've talked about this before, how endocrine versus the nervous system, the hormones are a much slower, longer lasting effect, whereas the nervous system is very quick, but also short-lived. Endocrine, meaning that it releases inside of the body, versus exocrine glands, exo being outside, meaning that things are getting released outside of the body. And we'll look into all the specifics as we go through this material. Number 3, categorize the chemical classification of hormones and explain the importance of this in synthesis, storage, and transport in the blood. Remember in biochemistry, I believe it was Biochem 1? I think it was Biochem 1. We had that chart of the different hormones and, which ones are steroids, which ones are catecholamines, which ones are kind of that sort of, which ones are peptides, all of those different classifications. We're going to dive into that again. Finally, compare and contrast the types of receptors that each hormonal class binds to. We'll look at second messenger and list the types of second messengers that are utilized by different hormones. Think again back to biochemistry, the cascade reactions. Remember how you'll have something come and bind onto a receptor on the outer membrane, and that causes a different thing to occur. One that comes to mind is insulin with the tyrosine kinase receptor, how it binds and then it gets phosphorylated and causes a chain reaction inside of the cell. That's what we're talking about there, so we'll look at some of that. Number 6, outline the types of stimuli that control the release of hormones. Define the following: the target cell, agonist, antagonist, upregulation, downregulation, synergism, and permissiveness. Finally, identify the locations of the endocrine glands and the tissues in the body. So what is an endocrine gland? So the endocrine, so this is going to be giving us, looking at the point, differentiating the different part components. So the endocrine glands delivers product into the bloodstream. That's going to be our hormones. Exocrine glands do deliver their products into ducts that takes it to the epithelial surface. So big one to think about here is like sweat glands, right? Sweat is produced inside of the sweat gland, and then it's excreted. It's an exocrine that goes out the epithelial surface, goes onto the surface of the skin, which helps to cool us down. And while I do this, I'm going to kind of clean some of this up, just because as I've downloaded and re-uploaded all of this material, it's gotten a little bit out of order. So I'm going to make sure that as I fix these and kind of reorganize, I'll also go ahead and re-upload these into the Google Drive if you have purchased my notes. Make sure to check that out as we do this. Okay. So the hormones, what do hormones do? Hopefully at this point we have a good idea about hormones. You've been through biochemistry, you've been through Phys 1. We know that hormones are going to be released into the body and are going to cause different types of reactions. Let me do this. I'm going to make this look pretty because I want it to look nice and pretty. Endocrine versus exocrine. Hormones, what do they do? Okay, what do hormones do? So they're an endocrine gland product, and they are biologically active products that are released, and they're going to go and they're going to regulate bodily functions, specifically looking to maintain homeostasis and maintain the specific functions of the body. We're going to be looking a lot at, when we talk about homeostasis, think pancreas, think insulin, glucagon. When you think about the thyroid, think metabolism. Parathyroid, think calcium. The pituitary gland, a whole bunch of hormones are released from the pituitary gland, like our growth hormone. Look at our antidiuretic hormone. Ones like that are all going to be part of this whole system. And the endocrine system are those glands and the organs that make the hormones and then release them into the blood. So how does it differ from all the others? So the endocrine system, more or less, it's not acting on things directly, whereas some of the other organs, are going to have direct impacts. on other parts. So there's no direct connection between one organ to another in the direct physical sense. They are not connected. They all communicate with each other through the bloodstream. So the big picture is it's all through the bloodstream. An extra little note down here about endo and exocrine function. So the ovaries, the testes, as well as the pancreas are both endo and exocrine functions. If you think about ovaries, when they're releasing the hormones into uterus, testes, you get release of hormones through the sperm, or just through the ejaculation. Pancreas, you're getting that lipases and proteases and such, digestive enzymes being released into the intestines, which then exit the body. So those are both endo and exocrine functions. So we compare the nervous system, say comparison between nervous versus endocrine. I'm just going to do this. Nervous versus endocrine system. So if we look at our nervous system, we already kind of mentioned this, it's short-term management, okay? It's very, very quick, very instantaneous, and it's something that we need to have done right then and there. It happens, and then we're done. The endocrine system is that long-term management. A good thing to compare this to is fight or flight sympathetic nervous system versus cortisol release. So our fight or flight is immediate issue. We call it the there's a bear reaction, okay? Because bears. So if all of a sudden we're walking through the woods, we see a bear, boom, immediately heart rate kicks up, we're breathing deeper, our eyelids, our pupils dilate, our muscles tense, our blood flows quicker, more to the muscles that we're going to use in the legs because we need to fight or we need to run away. Cortisol release. Cortisol is the long-term management of stress. So that's a lot like going through chiropractic school, where you have a long-term stress, or like you're prepping for finals, and over the period of multiple weeks, you're high stress, on high alert, trying to get all of this stuff done, and cortisol is going to be producing making sure that you have enough of the glucose in your blood to maintain that level of brain function and that level of activity. Some of the similarities, when we look at the actual mechanism of action, they're both using chemical ligands. Big difference is that obviously the nerves are releasing those chemicals directly onto the receptors, whereas with the endocrine system, it's going to release those hormones, release those chemical ligands into the bloodstream, and then its blood is going to carry it to wherever it needs to go. And it's not always the bloodstream. Let's see if we get into that in this. Yeah, we will get into that in a little bit. We've seen this before. Autocrine, paracrine, endocrine, kind of the difference between that. So within the endocrine system, I should say the endocrine organs, the glands, they are not all only using the bloodstream, right? There's going to be a couple of different parts as well. We already mentioned nerves start quick and ends quick. Endocrine takes time and can last longer. There is the specificity of function, so both are only going to affect those cells that have the proper receptor ligands. Okay, more comparison of all of this. When we talked about nervous system, we always mentioned how the action potentials kind of you have that all or nothing response. As soon as you have an action potential, you get all or nothing. And the only way to increase the signal is to send more action potentials, and you have to release more chemical ligands and get more action potentials overcoming the refractory or the relative refractory period. With the endocrine system, it's a little bit different, where you can, if you release more hormone, you're going to have more of a response. So the amount of the hormone plays a bigger role in the strength of the signal. So more hormone means bigger signal, whereas within the nervous system, just more action potentials means stronger signal. And again, the endocrine system can take minutes, sometimes hours, or even days, depending on what hormone it is. The nervous system as well. There are instances where you get these neurohormones going into the circulatory system. Think about some of those catecholamines. We think about epinephrine, norepinephrine, those guys, where they play a role as a hormone, but they also play a role as a neurotransmitter. So we get overlap, and there is a definite connection between the endocrine and the nervous system, even with sometimes the nervous system innervating the endocrine system in order to kind of co-regulate the body and make sure that there is the homeostasis that we need. So that's why it says the two systems are inseparable, because they work together to regulate homeostasis. Different types of signaling. So the true endocrine goes from the cell. A cell releases the hormone. It goes to the blood, and the hormone reaches the target cell. The target cell being wherever the receptor is. The neuroendocrine system, we have a neuron that can release a hormone, travels through the blood. That hormone then reaches a target cell. There's also paracrine. We talked about paracrine. I'm going to write it down in here. Paracrine. Para meaning neighbor. So hormone affects if I can spell, a neighboring cell. The target cell is close by. And then autocrine, auto equals self. So the hormone is acting on the same cell that is releasing it. We don't spend a lot of time talking about paracrine and autocrine. They're not as common in this context, in the context that we're going to be looking at, as the endocrine and neuroendocrine. Continuing, so information about hormones. So the hormones are going to affect all of the different tissues and all of the organs within the body. Big functions, big ones that we want to remember. These 5 right here are ones that are easily testable. We want to make sure that we have all of these down. Growth and development. We need hormones released at the correct times and in the correct amounts in order to grow and develop properly. Not just our musculoskeletal system, but also our nervous system and our brain. Reproduction. As I'm sure many of you have heard in recent times, infertility has been a massive, massive issue. A huge part of that being that we've been playing with a lot of different medications and processed foods and all of this stuff that mess with hormone levels. And once you mess with the hormones, it throws the whole system out of whack, and reproduction becomes an issue. Energy and metabolism, the intake, production, utilization, and storage of all this stuff. We think about intake. Certain hormones are going to make us feel hungry. That cortisol, that stress, makes you crave that sugary food. Production, depending on what hormones are going on in our body, stuff like thyroid hormones, which we're going to look at all these in depth. Thyroid hormones are really big for our metabolism of producing and making energy, how we utilize it, where it's going in the body, if there's a certain part of the body, like if we have growth hormone going through a growth spurt as a teenager, we need a lot of energy and we need a lot of materials going to the bones, going to the muscles, going to the joints, going to the cartilage, all of these structures that are growing. We need to know where to put it, where to get the energy. We need to know what parts of the body need the energy. And then storage, again, think insulin, glucagon, those hormones, dealing with, hey, how much energy do we store versus how much are we using? Maintenance of the environment, a whole bunch of stuff, the blood volume, electrolytes, body temperature, all of that stuff, major parts of hormones. There are multiple effects on different organs, the skeleton, on the heart, on the central nervous system, etc., on the GI system. It's all interconnected, and we'll look at all of those things. So there's kind of 3 different types of hormones. You can have a single hormone that has a whole bunch of different functions. So it can go into a bunch of different target cells to cause different things to happen. That's like thyroxine. Thyroxine is going to be our T3 hormone. Let me double check that. I want to make sure. I misspoke. Thyroxine is our T4 hormone. Thyroxine is our T4, and it's going to go to all the different cells in the body and have different reactions depending on which cells it's going to. One hormone has a specific function, like thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. You'll see these start to get abbreviated really early on, which I wish would give you a little bit more time to kind of adjust to the regular names before throwing all the abbreviations at you. But it's good practice. So thyroid stimulating hormone, we stop, we think, okay, imagine what does that hormone do? It stimulates the thyroid. It tells the thyroid to release more thyroid hormone, thyroxine, T3, T4. You can also have one function, and many hormones do that same function, like growth and development. You need all sorts of different types of hormones, which we'll look at all of them that take part in that. The classifications of hormones by chemical structure. I'll see, there was a little chart in biochemistry. I'll see if I can find it and add it in here. Let me see if I can find it. She might include one here. There is one here. I would prefer a straight chart. Let's look at a chart of hormones. Of hormone classification by chemical structure. Let's see if we can find a good chart to throw in here right now. Here's a super basic one that'll give us some of the information that we need. That's way too fuzzy. So we'll see, these are the ones that we talked about. So proteins and polypeptides, derivatives of amino acid tyrosine. If you remember in Biochem 2, I went on a whole little rampage saying, make sure you know all of the ones from tyrosine and from tryptophan. Hopefully you remember me saying that, because it does not go away. Let's see, open image, new tab. Let's see if I can get this. There we go. So you'll see there's quite a few hormones that we're going to be going through. Here's the general list right there. And then steroid hormones and eicosanoids. Again, pulling a lot from Biochem 2 in Phys 2. Okay, which I told you guys that was going to happen. So some of the stuff that we're going to be looking at, these questions: how is it made? Where is it stored? Where is it stored? How is it secreted? How is it transported? And how will it carry out its effect? And also, what effect does it have? These are all the questions that we are going to be asking about all of these different hormones. And like I said, that little loop, we'll see. We'll get through all of that. Here, derivative of tyrosine are our catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Again, go back, if you want to go back to the biochemistry book, Biochem 2, I believe it was chapter 11, 10 or 11, let's see, try to, Biochem 2, it was exam 3, chapter 9, it was chapter 9 in Biochem 2, the special products derived from amino acids. So if you want to go back to chapter 9 in the Biochem 2 book, you're going to see all of these, again, the tyrosine and the tryptophan, all those guys. Here is another nice little chart for us. I have written down here some of the, when it's shortened, what that means. So the hypothalamus, these are all of the hormones that releases from there. Anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary, thyroid, pancreas, liver, parathyroid, placenta, kidney, heart, GI tract, and adipocyte fat cells. So there's even more tissues and glands that I didn't mention in the very beginning. So we'll see a lot of these, and let's go ahead and actually list out some of the other one. It's been a little while since I've looked at the specific names of the hormones, so I'm going to make sure that I double check all of them, make sure I spell it all right. This is thyrotropin releasing hormone. GnRH is let's make sure I spell it right. Yeah, the gonadotropin. Gonadotropin releasing hormone. GnRH. CRH. Yep. Is corticotropin releasing hormone. GHRH is growth hormone releasing hormone. GHRH. ACTH is the adrenocorticotropic hormone. TSH is the thyroid stimulating hormone. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. LH is luteinizing hormone. Make sure I spell all these right. As you're reading through these and like you come to abbreviations, as you like continue through this material, I really want you to stop and say the full name of all of these. PRL is the prolactin. GH is growth hormone. ADH is diuretic hormone. So the reason why I want you to do that is it's a lot like with microbiology. Diuretic, there it is. Jeez, can't spell today. ADH. Diuretic hormone, there it is. Calcitonin, insulin, glucagon, somatostatin, somatomedin C. PTH is parathyroid hormone. HCG, HCS, HPL. Again, make sure that I spell all of these right. Some of these I hopefully you recognize. Yeah, so like I said, the reason why you want to make sure that you are saying all of these out loud every time that you see them is because some of them are going to be look relatively familiar. or you're going to see them either in their shortened form or their long form in different parts of tests, of quizzes, of other material. The more often you can say these out loud, the better your long-term memory is going to be when it comes to remembering the hormone and also remembering where it is from. ANP is the anti-nuclear protein. Or atrial. Atrial natriuretic peptide. NATR. There it is. Okay. I won't waste more time doing this, but there's most of them. You can go and you can get the last couple, or you'll see them later on. But again, as you see these, try and use their full name. The more you can use the full name, the better off you're going to be. And again, here, even more. These two slides, actually a couple slides, throw these into Quizlet immediately. Do this like TRH, separate each of the hormones into the gland or the tissue, and know each and every single one where they're coming from, and whether they are a peptide or protein, steroid hormone, or an amine hormone, because that is going to be a ton of test questions. Eicosanoids, remember from Biochem 2. I think this was chapter 4 or 5 in Biochem 2. Maybe 6. Chapter 5. Yeah, you got it right. Chapter 5. Eicosanoids, all of that kind of stuff. Eicosanoids as well are not going to go away. These are going to come back, and you'll see these a lot in your Gen Chem class. So take some time and go back and review eicosanoids. If you need to jump back, watch the book recording on the channel, because these are going to come back. The leukotrienes, the prostaglandins, thromboxanes, and prostacyclins. Methods of production and secretion of all of these different guys. So starting with the polypeptides and the proteins. So because they are peptide hormones, right, the whole process is very similar to protein synthesis. So we get DNA, the DNA unsplices, we get transcription of an mRNA, it translates inside of the endoplasmic reticulum, stored and completed in the Golgi apparatus, and then it's excreted through the secretory vesicles, right? And then those will go off, and those G protein coupled receptors, these peptide hormones, that's where some of those are going. That's what their job. They're going to go and they're going to bind to those G protein coupled receptors to cause on their target cells to cause those specific reaction stuff that we've talked about in biochemistry. So that's what you want to remember. Very similar to the protein synthesis, that whole process. If you do not recall this whole process, review this. It's in Biochem 1 or Biology of Cells and Tissues. I was just looking at those earlier today. And Biochem Cells and Tissues, I believe it was. I believe it was week 3 of Biology of Cells and Tissues. Biochem 1. It was lessons or chapters 2, 3, and then 5 and 6 was all of that stuff about this whole process and the chemical signaling and all that kind of good stuff. So you can go back and review those if you would like. Steroid hormones. The synthesis and secretion is a big thing here. We only make steroid hormones when we absolutely need them. We don't have a whole bunch of extra of these going on. We make them, and as soon as they're made, they get released out into the cell. So the way that this works, let me make sure. This is the specific reaction with ACTH, the adrenocorticotropic hormone. And that's made in the anterior pituitary gland. Binds to a receptor. We get our G protein coupled reaction. That adenylate cyclase whole reaction. Think back to G protein coupled receptors back in Biochem 1. I told you this was all coming back. We get an LDL, that's a low density lipoprotein, comes in, broken down into cholesterol esters, broken into cholesterol, and broken all the way down. You get the formation from the fats get broken down into cholesterol. From the cholesterol, we take those and we actually convert them into the hormones that we need to produce, like progesterone, like testosterone, like cortisol. All of those are some of our steroid hormones. So remember, G protein coupled receptor paired with cholesterol. Thyroid hormones. We're gonna talk about this when we get to the actual thyroid glands. We're gonna skip this for now. We're gonna go deeper into the whole process of how these are produced. Amine hormones. These are our water solubles. These are those graphs. We've seen these before. Tyrosine is converted to the thyroid hormones, which we'll look at again later. Or tyrosine goes to L-DOPA, to dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and it can go. And those are released a lot of times in the adrenal glands. These are all water soluble. All of these, the enzymes, all that kind of stuff. This is all testable material, depending on the professor that you have. Get a read for them, ask how specific they want you guys, how specific they would like you to know the enzymes. But it's really, really important to know at least the process, that tyrosine to L-DOPA to dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, because this right here, this is also huge on Part 1 board exams. Finally, eicosanoids. Again, we don't go super deep into this because this was actually already covered. This was covered in Biochem 2. Like I said, go back and review this. You will have test questions on it. We'll see. My professor specifically didn't go over all the eicosanoid stuff. When I took the course, it was expected that it was previous knowledge. However, I do recommend I already have my video on eicosanoids, the whole production of them, and when they're released, why they're released. So you can go back and watch that video if you need to remember that. Control of the secretions. So I think we're close to the halfway point. I want to make sure that these videos don't get too long. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here so that doesn't get too long, and we'll finish hopefully the rest of this lesson 1 in the next recording.